So hello everyone, and a big welcome to today's webinar. This is the first webinar in our Toolkit webinar series, and today we're looking at Kickstart and Grow, essential steps and best practices for a successful food project. It's fantastic to have you all here as we come together to explore how we can reduce food waste and ensure good food reaches those who need it most in our communities. My name is Kerry. I'm the Education Coordinator here at FoodCloud. So I suppose for those of you who aren't too familiar with FoodCloud and what we do, FoodCloud is a non-profit social enterprise working to tackle the twin issues of food waste and food insecurity. Our mission is to transform surplus food into opportunities to make the world a kinder place. FoodCloud redistributes surplus food from the food industry to a network of charity and community partners. In Ireland, we redistribute surplus food to over 700 community groups. So this not only prevents good food from going to waste, but it also strengthens communities by ensuring that more people have access to nutritious meals, helps community organisations save money on food bills, promotes personal well-being, and ensures that everyone plays their part in tackling climate breakdown. So this webinar series is all about empowering you, whether you're a passionate individual, part of a local group, or simply want to make a difference in your community. So we'll walk you through the FoodCloud Academy Toolkit, which is a step-by-step guide to help you start and run a food sharing project in your area. So I suppose, what is a community food sharing project? This is any initiative that shares good food that would have gone to waste, offering it for free or at a low cost. Each webinar will break the toolkit down into easy to follow parts, highlighting the most important things to consider. Plus, you'll hear directly from FoodCloud experts and community partners who have already set up successful food projects and are ready to share their experiences with you. So this webinar series will run every 2 weeks, and each week our 30-minute webinar will cover different areas, including, so this week it's Kickstart and Grow, so looking at setting up successful food projects. This will be followed in 2 weeks' time by Food Safety 101, essential laws and guidelines for food sharing projects. Following that, we will look at the power of people, recruiting, managing, and motivating your team. This will bring us on to looking at bringing your project to life, practical steps for success. And then we will look at making an impact, how to share your project story effectively. And finally, we will look at funding made simple, so securing support with confidence. Today's webinar will be short, practical, and packed with useful insights from both a FoodCloud expert and a community member who has been in your shoes. Here's what to expect from today's webinar. So you will get insight into how to assess community needs when starting a food project, identifying key stakeholders and building those local partnerships, and then looking at the role of good governance and project engagement, project management in sustainability. So the FoodCloud expert today is Aoibheann O'Brien, our co-founder and now Director of Development and Innovation, speaking about the Growers Project. And we are also joined by Cian Walsh, an environmental and sustainability representative from UCC Students' Union, speaking about the UCC SU Pop-Up Food Pantry, and both will be sharing their first-hand experiences. I should say that there will also be a chance for Q&A after the presentations, so do feel free to drop your questions into the chat and I'll put them to our presenters after. We hope this session leaves you feeling inspired and equipped with the tools you need to take action in your community. So let's dive right in. I'd like to introduce Aoibheann, who will start us off.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining today. Obviously, FoodCloud is a long-running project at this stage, almost 12 years old. So to help guide, I suppose, the learning, we've picked a more recent project to focus on in terms of getting something up and running. So we focused on the FoodCloud Growers Project. The aim of the project is to redistribute surplus food from growers that would be wasted at a farm level and provide that to community groups across the country. The vision being reducing farm level food waste while also providing fresh produce to community organisations across the country. The big challenge is how this can be rolled out nationally and how can it be sustainable in the long term. So there was a big vision for the project, but with all projects, you have to start somewhere and you have to start small. So just in terms of assessing the need and starting with the problem, that would be a really big focus for how we look at any new project in FoodCloud is really trying to understand the problem that we're trying to solve first, and then coming up with the solution. So for this project, we were very much inspired by similar projects that we had seen internationally. So we are unashamed about stealing good ideas. And I suppose that's part of why we're trying to bring all of our community partners together more, because there is a really big value in trying to adapt something you've seen elsewhere into your own local context. And this is definitely what we did with the Growers Project. So when we saw a project like this working internationally, we did need to understand was there similar or different conditions in an Irish context. So we started by trying to understand the problem. We engaged with Munster Technology University to do a little bit of research on how much produce was wasted at a farm level and what were the barriers to donating. Now, we did get funding to work with MTU, but you don't need a full university behind you to start doing this. But in our case, it provided really valuable information in terms of what were the barriers, and that included the cost, which was a major barrier, but also it gave us the excuse to talk to growers for advice rather than going in directly with an ask. So in your project, do talk to as many people as possible first, because they'll then start to engage with you when you come back to them with a solution later on. And on the other side, we were looking at the demand. So we did surveys with our existing charity partners to understand what their food needs were. And we have been getting consistent feedback for many years about the need for more fresh produce and fresh vegetables to support communities across the country. I will say here that this particular project, I know we've lots of members who are work with us on the Foodiverse side and also on the Hub side. At the moment, this project is available for members or charity partners that we have who work with our hubs across the country. So just a short kind of testimonial there to gather feedback from charities. So you'll see their Buds Family Resort Centre in North Kerry and their need for this particular produce. And then that was replicated across the country. So really, I suppose the main message here is start with the problem you're trying to solve, understand it as much as you can before you kind of go to solutions. So the next stage really then was getting the project up and running. And here I'd like to get the message across about the importance of stakeholders. So we knew that the food was there. We knew that the farmers were willing to donate, but had a challenge with getting the food to us at a low cost. And we knew that the community organisations needed the food. But in terms of how to take the first step forward, we really needed to work in partnership. So I'm just going to go through each of the stakeholders and the opportunities and challenges. So growers, as most people know, farmers are busy people. They're not at their desks and they're challenging to reach. So having spoken to them during the research phase of the project, we just started with a couple of what we call pioneers. So pioneering partners who are willing to take the risk. You only need one. In our case, we just had 5 growers who started out the project with us, and we did leverage others to introduce us to growers. So in our case, we did leverage Tesco to ask us to introduce us to other growers to get involved. On the community side, when we started initially, we were just channeling the produce that we were receiving into our existing network of hub partners, but we realized very quickly that when we were getting a higher volume of produce, we needed to cultivate relationships with more strategic partners who were able to take higher volumes of surplus and move it quite quickly. So now we work with our network of hub partners that take more and more fresh vegetables every week, but we also have some key partners that they can take large volumes and distribute it out very quickly to more rural charities from there. So the likes of Food Share Kerry, Clonmany Family Resource Centre, and other larger charities that can deal with large volumes. And then internal teams. So how it works in practice, we needed to get the food to our warehouses, then we needed to sort the food and get it out to charities. So we did need a lot of collaboration with internal teams. And also, I suppose, in terms of project management, you start with one thing and you continue to iterate it and improve it. So we started just bringing the food back and getting it out to existing members. Then we started to work with more strategic partners who could move higher volumes. And then then more recently, we've moved on to using Foodiverse, which is our platform to connect growers directly to charities. So we have one example in West Kerry where the potato farmer is directly connecting to the charity, and one in Donegal, and we're hoping to extend that. And finally, funders. I know you're going to be learning a little bit more about that through these webinars, but keeping funders and partners up to date with progress, celebrating any successes and flagging challenges early is a really, really important part. And just that, I suppose the image on the side there, we started very small with 5 growers and I think 20 charity partners. And over 4 or 5 years, we've now expanded to 8 growers. So still relatively small, but to 237 charities across the country receiving the produce. So just to say that it is an iterative process, and there is it's important to start small and then to kind of grow sustainably. So if we just move on to the last slide there, I suppose good governance, accountability and project management. The main advice is to put pen to paper. And I suppose it's a bit easier now. You can use AI tools and ChatGPT to help you to put your plan on a page. Set out a top level plan and vision for what you want to achieve, and set up goals up front so that you can assess the project against it. And sometimes that's just for internal motivation. You're always going to want to improve what you're doing, and sometimes you forget where you started from. So it's important at the start to just lay out what you're trying to achieve with your project, set out the problem, the solution, and then some timelines with a couple of tasks and milestones broken down. So for us, it was do the research first and understand the problem. For the next, it was a very small pilot. You can see there in 2021, we redistributed 30 tons from 5 growers, and over time that has grown to 235 tons, with us aiming to get to 300 tons this year. But you can see that it did grow slowly over time. A top level budget, it doesn't have to be scary. It is just putting numbers into a spreadsheet to make sure that you have an overall idea of what you're working with. Identify your key stakeholders and people you need to make this happen, and just really work through what are the major risks and mitigations. So food safety, health and safety, all the kind of background stuff that you need to keep an eye on. Tracking your progress and impact, and keeping everybody up to date with what's happening. That can be just a quick email on a weekly basis to whoever you're working with to keep everybody on track and motivated, even if you're just a small group. And I suppose we will talk about funding later in webinars, but if you do have a funder associated with the project, whether that's, I suppose Cian might talk about where he got his funding to get set up, but make sure you're reporting back and fulfilling all funding requirements as well. So I hope that was helpful. I'm at 9 minutes of my 10-minute allocation. I suppose the main message to get across is start small, grow sustainably, and really try and understand the problem before you go to the solution, because that will set you up for success. So Kerry, back over to you, I think.
Yeah, fantastic, Aoibheann. Thank you so much for that. We'll come back to you in the Q&A section. Cian, we will move over to you now, please. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. And just thank you to FoodCloud for having me present this afternoon. So I guess just quickly first, an introduction. So my name is Cian Walsh. I'm the UCC Students' Union Environmental and Sustainability Rep, and also the co-chairperson of Green Campus at UCC. And our initiative, so far we have run a 4-week pilot program in partnership with FoodCloud. We call it our pop-up pantry, with the kind of dual aim of reducing food waste and promoting sustainability on campus. So the trial program involved about 50 students and providing food to 50 students each week, pantry essentials, and really just supporting students that were perhaps facing food insecurity. So today I'm going to cover 3 key elements of starting up this initiative, sort of building on the previous presentation. So it's assessing community needs, stakeholder engagement, and good governance and project management. So firstly, for us, I think in terms of assessing community needs, the first step for us was to speak to existing initiatives. And that for us was Galway, and in the University of Galway, where they already had a developed pantry. And then looking at ourselves and what we had available in University College Cork, and actually trying to see, is there a gap in terms of what is available to our target community, and in our case, students. We were also fortunate enough to be able to conduct primary research as part of a wider cost of living report that we had compiled. And from that report, we deduced that 27% of students had cut back on food. So this was a really significant figure for us. And really the next step in our process was actually to have the pilot program, which would really be the determinant of whether or not there was a community need for this program. And what we found is, while the pilot program was small, we had a very high scale of demand where students were claiming the 50 or so tickets within 30 minutes or less upon their release, a week before each sort of pop-up where students could avail of food. That for us has been the clearest indicator that this needed to become a permanent initiative. And also, you can note on the right of the slide there that during the pilot we also ran a survey to really build that sort of momentum and the figures. So, for example, that deduced that 87% of the participants would continue to use the pantry on a weekly basis. And that for us was also really important in terms of now when we're talking to funders and external stakeholders, having that data is really important in being able to show that community need. So I guess moving on to key stakeholders. For us, this was dependent on what we need and when we needed it. And first and foremost for us, it was volunteers, because the Students' Union, and we ran it in partnership with Green Campus as well, really was in need of a solid volunteer base. And that was through Green Campus for us, because if we needed volunteers, if it's 5 or 6 hours a week and 2 volunteers an hour, we were looking at kind of 15 volunteers a week almost doing 1 or 2 hours. And actually being able to engage with maybe other charitable groups that you can gather that base from, I think was really important. And I think, as mentioned before, that sort of food safety side and other safety requirements that exist and who you need to engage with. In our case, it was as well the university kind of safety management committee and being able to go through that risk assessment procedure effectively. I think for us, and it's important to mention that really the structure and support that was offered by FoodCloud throughout the whole process was really important to us as the key stakeholder, and feeling part of almost a community where every week to talk to delivery drivers and people based in the hubs. So I think further onto that, I would just say that the most important, maybe other key stakeholder to bear in mind during developing kind of your initiative would be similar initiatives or other maybe charities or supports that are available to your community should they require something further than the pantry, for example. So of course, this is based on the capacity, but for us, being able to signpost to other initiatives that were in place, if there was that need, was really important. And then finally, I guess, project management. I think there are so many elements of this, particularly when it's based on volunteerism and you're not holding somebody to account to a contract, and you're perhaps might be managing a lot of people. So really trying to ensure that everyone knows what responsibilities they have and when they're supposed to be at a certain place and what exactly is their motivation or reason to be there, and keeping that team spirit up was really like a part of our initiative. So even, for example, having a very clearly defined rostering system for us was really important, being able to publish that roster a week in advance, so that people knew which hours they were working. Another element that was kind of, I think, important to highlight is the timeline. I think initial conversations for us around Would We Have a Pantry began in around October of last year. Our pilot began in February, and now we're looking towards a timeline of October, November to have a permanent system in place. So really allowing yourself the time to ensure that everything is in sort of the correct procedure, I think is really important, and taking it slow and steady sort of actually does win the race. Then in terms of funding, I think also very important to highlight around project management for us. To date, it has been internally funded within the Students' Union because of kind of the limited scope of the pilot program. But because of that pilot program being able to showcase it, we're now able to move to a place where we can discuss with funders what exactly, with a very clear image of what we want, and have the digital assets and the photos and the experiences of students that have already gone through it has been really important for us. I think something else that's important to highlight, and it's down there at the bottom, is that there are now many different stakeholders involved, whether it's from a welfare side, sustainability side, green campus, that we're now looking at having a real permanent structure where there's perhaps a steering committee, because at the moment how decisions are made are really based on just kind of maybe one or two people, and those are often it's volunteer positions in these initiatives. So ensuring that there's a structure that can kind of outlive the maybe founder of the initiative, I think is really important. For example, in my own role as environmental rep, that comes to an end of term at the end of May, and there needs to be a very clear kind of procedure as to how a successor or successors are able to manage the project in the future. So keeping those things in mind, I think, are really important. So yeah, I guess just as a summary and kind of a wrap up, developing a pantry takes time, but it has been a really worthwhile experience thus far for us. While sometimes it can be frustrating, for example, with us with some of the safety requirements within the university, difficult to navigate, they can be overcome. I think good governance is equal to long-term sustainability is really like a core message for us, and making sure that all of your stakeholders are engaged throughout the process is really important as well. And those updates and perhaps that social media promotion as well is also important, to just be able to flag so that the university community or your community, whatever your target community is aware of what's happening. Then I know there's a Q&A now. I put my email address at the bottom if anybody would like to use it and learn more about our initiative and what was involved. So I think that's my 10 minutes. Thank you very much for listening, and I welcome any questions.
Thanks a million, Cian. And thank you both, Aoibheann and Cian, for those wonderful presentations. Yeah, just to remind anybody, any questions or points that you'd like to make, if you pop it into the chat, I'll put it to the presenters. I suppose I just jotted down a few notes that I think might be worth mentioning. Even at the start of your presentation, you mentioned the idea around, well, let's say, stealing ideas, I think was your phrase. Let's call that not needing to reinvent the wheel. How important is that for community groups setting up food sharing models?
Well, Kerry, as you said, there is a huge network of charities across the country now doing some kind of food sharing. And I suppose you don't need to reinvent the wheel. The aim of us putting more work into this on our side is to support that happening. But there is a local context. And as Cian said, like for him, the best people to reach out to were people in other universities serving the same, I suppose, group of people. So, you know, I would encourage anybody who's considering scaling or setting up a project to reach out to ourselves in FoodCloud, and we can connect you with similar organizations, because each context and region is a little bit different, and I suppose your role is to figure out what the need is within your community. So yeah, and we unashamedly taking best practice from others and rolling it out, because they're very similar challenges no matter what kind of scale of the project, but it is good to talk to somebody who's in a similar starting point as yourself.
Yeah, fantastic. And I suppose as a follow-on to that, it is worth noting that we have case studies, both video and text case studies, on our website under FoodCloud Academy that spotlights community food sharing projects that have been really successful. So you can check them out and then maybe network or reach out to those people, which brings me on to Cian, because that is exactly what you did. You highlighted the importance of making that kind of initial links with groups already doing what you're interested in. I suppose, what did you learn from it, or what was the greatest takeaway from that?
Thank you, Kerry. That's a really good question. We had quite intense meetings with Galway to just really go through what their process was like. And some of the key takeaways, for example, it was really highlighted to us that demand is going to be crazy and do a ticketing system from the start, for example. And that for us was like a really key takeaway, because otherwise it would not have been as smooth those first couple of weeks as it would have been otherwise. Good governance was really highlighted as the most important thing by those in Galway, as something that was really necessary, because they have been at their pantry for a number of years now. So actually trying to look back at what their original steps were really important in that sense. And that they have a steering committee, for example, and now we're trying to see how would that be replicated here. Is it slightly different, or is it slightly the same? And yes, there's some kind of changes and a different context, but having that similar initiative that's already in place, and you're kind of almost like a goal in mind to build that point, was really important.
Fantastic, yeah. And kind of following on from that, the idea around identifying key stakeholders, like even in your presentation, you mentioned MTU and how valuable they were in terms of information and so on. And Cian, you mentioned, or you referenced a report that you just relied on as well. But if we bring that back to the community level, for groups setting up, it could be your local development company, it could be the Tidy Towns Committee. So there are value in identifying those key stakeholders within your local area as well. Just one little question that came in there: what are the biggest expenses involved in running a food pantry? For example, what is funding most needed for?
Ian, do you want to take that, or do you want me to?
We can do a bit of both. I guess for us so far, and when we're costing developing it as a permanent structure, it's that kind of initial investment in fridges and freezers when you want to build to that point, and being able to take a wider range of food. Our pilot program for the full month was less than €200, I think, of expense in total, because of volunteerism, and because of just using existing structures. But of course, we weren't, during that pilot program, I think it was important to highlight that we weren't taking food that would be stored in a fridge or a freezer. But now I think it's those one-off expenses. The FoodCloud membership, I think is really good value for what you get. So I don't know, I think that's kind of my input, and maybe even if you want to build on it.
Yeah, I think generally it would be as Cian said, just if you have a space, just to kit it out a little bit to make it food safe. And then in the context of, say, the Growers Project, the costs associated with that are transport and then logistics and getting the food in and out. That's the biggest cost from our side. But from a food pantry side, it would be the infrastructure. So storage, shelving, fridges, freezers, and then if you volunteers that need to cover fuel cost, if you're collecting food either through the app or from one of the hubs, they would be the major costs. And just, I suppose, to add to that, from a FoodCloud perspective, if you're connected with your retail partners, there's no cost. And as Cian said, if you are looking to connect to one of the hubs in Dublin, Galway or Cork, there is a membership model, but as Cian said, they start very low, and it's just for us to be able to make our service sustainable to the charities. And we can discuss that with you, obviously, as well, as you start your project.
Excellent. I'm just conscious of the time, so I'm going to bring these discussions to a close for today. Our next webinar, themed Food Safety 101, Essential Laws and Guidelines for Food Sharing Projects, is on May 21st at 12:30 to 1 p.m. And we'd invite you to join us again, and you can use the same link as today. I would like to thank our brilliant presenters and to you all for joining. To watch the webinar again, you can check out our FoodCloud YouTube channel and share on your socials, please do. And to get more information on setting up a food sharing project, you can check out our toolkit at food.cloud/academy/toolkits. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much again for joining us.